Yes, ladies and gentlemen, again I apologize for that break. Something attacked my throat. I hope it doesn't recur, and I had to exit the studio to get rid of it. I am now joined by fellow council member, the well-known and popular, meaning well-liked, uh, member Agag. So I was establishing a platform on which to build a case that education is critically important in any society, particularly so in developing countries. You know, at one point we used to be referred to as third world countries. But over time, some groups of individuals in their wisdom decided that it is more politically correct to describe us as developing countries. Because we always heard of the so-called first world, and we were the third world. There was never any clear description or definition of who constituted the second world, if there was such a thing. So we have the developed countries, and we are a part of the developing set of nations. So particularly for us, education is even more fundamentally critical. And I'm not happy, having spent all my life and being very familiar with, spent all my life in the field of education and being very familiar with the workings, the trappings, the strengths and weaknesses of the education system here. I am not satisfied with the state of education in St. Kitts. Let me now build on that platform. In September, early September, the Minister of Education, the Honorable Minister of Education, Jeffrey Hanley, at a session with the teachers, this is an annual affair where the Education Minister meets with the teachers just before school reopens, and it's a ceremony to welcome back the teachers and to establish conditions and expectations and goals and so on. But this year, he spoke of the education system being marked by academic promise, personal growth, and national pride. I want to suggest to you that those are mere cliches, stale platitudes, and empty rhetoric. What constitutes personal growth in education? What is the essence, the manifestation of the academic promise? And how does education instill and extract from students national pride? I dare to say that none of this is happening in our schools in any deliberate, in any significant, in any meaningful way. And I challenge you, if you don't believe, if you think I'm simply being critical, to visit any school. You may need permission, I'm not sure, but visit any school. Do not let it be known by the rank and file, that is to say, the student body or the rank and file of the teachers, while you are there. So you're there incognito, as in a manner of speaking. Walk with your phone, walk with your pen and your paper. Take notes. Pay close attention to how the school day is run. Look at all the various assets and aspects of education. In other words, pay attention to the bell. When the bell is rung, and the response to the bell of both teachers and students at the start of the school day. Pay attention to the number of students who arrive after the bell. Pay attention to the number of teachers who arrive after the bell. And pay attention to how they respond as they come in long after the bell. Pay attention to whether there is any sense of haste, any sense of concern as to, I'm late, I gotta get to my class quickly. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to the way the students are dressed. Pay attention to the way the teachers are dressed as well, male and female. Pay attention to what extent students are adhering to uniform, rules and regulations. For example, in public schools, there's a law against jewelry. For boys, their shirts must be properly tucked into their pants, and their pants must be on their waist. Pay attention to all of these trappings, because they're fundamental. I attended the basketball school, the best school in the world, and at that school we didn't wear uniforms at the time, but at that school we learned, we were taught that the way one dresses, whether it be in or out of a uniform, speaks to his character and speaks to the level of discipline with which he executes his duties, and the amount of self-respect and self-esteem that proper attire, adhering to the rules and regulations of the institution with respect to uniform, to what extent those indicate how the individual sees himself. But not only that, I wanted to pay attention to what happens in the classroom. How long does a teacher stay in the classroom, and how much teaching actually takes place? How many times do students leave the classroom for one reason or another? And of course, most of the time it's for frivolous reasons. And notice how many of them get permission to leave the classroom before they do. Notice how long they stay out before they return to the class. Notice what the teacher is doing during the class, the time they're supposed to be in the classroom, teaching and instructing and imparting information and knowledge. Notice how often they stop to take a call, or to make a call, or to visit their phone for whatever reason. Notice to what extent homework is given or homework is corrected. Notice to what extent students' social needs are addressed. Notice to what extent students' moral development is paid attention to. Notice how often the teacher uses technology, the smart boards, the computers. Notice what happens during break time. To what use is break put by both teachers and students? There are so many aspects that involve the school day, because it is a time when, and it's the place where the flux of human nature becomes manifest more so than almost any other institution, because it's the only institution that accommodates young people between the ages of 5 and 16, which of course all the psychologists in the world will tell you those are critical years, apart from maybe birth to 2. The years between 5 and 16 are the most important for human growth and development, especially with respect to mental development, mind development. The cognitive domain must be paid much attention to during that time. So I'm asking, when the minister says that he wants to focus on 4 core values of honesty, kindness, respect, and excellence, how are these measured? Of course he didn't speak about that, but how are these to be measured? How does the minister or the ministry expect these to be measured? To what extent can it be determined that they are successful or they are succeeding? Because I have said before that one of the major failures of the Ministry of Education is that it is yet to promulgate a definition of what constitutes success in education. How does the Ministry of Education determine that the process, the product, the intent, and the content of education are successful? What are the yardsticks? What are the indices? What are the indicators to determine, to know, to decide whether the education system, the formal education system in St. Kitts, is being successful, is producing desired results in both the affective and the cognitive domains? How do schools, as you visit, notice how schools deal with cursing, and you're going to hear a lot of that, fighting, you might see a lot of that, vulgarity, and the lack of etiquette, generally speaking. Notice how boys relate to girls and how girls relate to boys and how they relate to themselves. Be prepared for some very obscene language from the students, because they don't play when it comes to that. On and off the compound, in and out of uniform. And then you tell me whether you think we're on the right track. Now, don't say that you saw one student or two students or five behaving well, dressed well, listening, paying attention, and being decent and respectful. Because 5 or even 10 out of 200 or 500 or 800 is infinitesimally small, is statistically insignificant. Because you are going to find one or two students who are outstanding, quote unquote, who are exemplary, who are good students by whichever yardstick you use to measure them. But I am saying that they are far from sufficient in numbers. We are not accepting, we have grown to accept mediocrity. But I'm saying that we have come to a point where we should stop accepting mediocrity and instead insist on and accept only excellence. But how is that defined? When a student can get a grade 3, having gotten 40% of the total marks available on an exam paper, 40% he gets, and he gets a grade 3. I have argued that CXC should adopt a 2-pass system. You had a P and an F. P for pass, F for failure. If you get 80% and above, you get a P, you pass. 79 and below, you get an F, you fail. That is my position. 80% and above, you pass. So a student gets 10 Ps. Oh, then you know that student has exhibited mastery of all 10 subjects. Not 10 grade 3s, meaning possibly 10, 40%. In my books, he has not passed any. I set a benchmark of 60% as a pass mark in my classes. And there were times when I would increase it depending on the content. Because if you're dealing with simple vocabulary, spelling and so on, you better get 9 out of 10. Otherwise, I'm giving you an F. So, when you visit the school, pay attention to all of these issues and let me know. 6690984. Call me and let me know. See me in the street and stop me and tell me I visited this school, I visited that school, and these are my observations. And Michael, you're totally wrong. Blake, you're completely off target. Or, oh boy, I have to admit you're right. Not maybe 100%, but 90% right. Because I'm concerned about this. This is why I spent so long in the field. I see it as being the main vehicle that drives one from obscurity to prominence. I say it all the time. And I'm not satisfied with what is happening here. Alright? Not just a few students. Not just a few students. I wish it were just a few. I wish it were a very small minority of students who exhibited sociopathic behaviors, who showed no interest in school and education, who were miscreants and devious students in terms of behavior and attitude. I wish it were a very small number. Unfortunately, it is not a small number. Very importantly, I'm going to allow Member Agard to intervene in a minute. The level of reading in our schools, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, listening to Central Praise Radio and the Men's Council discussion tonight. I don't know if you are able to do so, but as much as you can, as best as you can, find out how many of the students can read or are reading at their grade level. In other words, a student in grade 3, normally 7, 8 years old, maybe 9. Is he reading as an 8 or 9-year-old should be able to read? students in grade 6, 10, 11, 12, heading for high school, are they reading at a level that suggests they are ready for high school? I challenge you to conduct those tests. I challenge the ministry to conduct those tests and bring in independent individuals from overseas to conduct those tests so that there's no bias. Give each child a passage to read, which should be, he should have mastered by the time he's in grade 4, 5, 6, whatever, and grade him according to set criteria. Grade him or her. And see how many students can call the words versus how many students can actually read the passage. Because there's a big difference, of course, between calling words and reading. You call the word because you can identify the word, and you know the word is get, and you take some time and you look and you know the word is your, and with some struggle you see the word is bless, blessing. You know the child is not reading, he's simply calling words and taking his time to call the words. One cannot derive any meaning from what the child is saying. There's a big difference between, and make sure your child can read, not just call words, so that he runs the words smoothly and fluently in a manner that suggests that he is deriving, extracting meaning from what he's reading. And when he's finished a sentence or a couple of sentences or a paragraph, you can ask him, what did you learn? What is the main point? What is the gist of that sentence or paragraph? If he was only calling words, if he or she was only calling words, he can't tell you. But if he or she was reading, he or she should be able to recall the essence of what he just read. Very good. I don't know if you have a question or two or a comment or two. I'm sure you
I have
do.
a couple of questions for you, yes. Yeah, blessed greetings, our listeners. Yeah, you were mentioning something about the minister goals. Something you said
That the minister said it's recorded here in the Observer newspaper of Friday, September 5th, 2025. I was actually quoting him.
Oh, okay.
The article is entitled Hanley applauds student success, sets tone for New Year.
Okay,
And the
so-
student success here, by the way, focus exclusively only on the so-called CXC results.
Right, and so let me ask you. Now, in doing a little reading, I've seen that more so in the Caribbean, that the education system seems to be modeled in a setting for, that the Industrial Revolution, basically, basically to pump out people to just obey, be compliant, and not so much critical thinkers. And as you told me some time back, that most of this education system also came from the churches. And so if we're still in 2025 pushing that model, that type of education system, like you're trying to pump out people to work in a factory, but we don't have no factories really. We just maybe have one or two. You're not pumping out critical thinkers, and then the areas that deal with competence based, like skill development and so on, is seen as a joke. So it's like we just have everything upside down. I mean, speak to that a little.
Well, you see, the teachers in the various schools, they teach according to a so-called curriculum or syllabus. But it is the Ministry of Education which is responsible for designing and constructing those documents, those areas. Of course, they should do so in consultation with the public at large, with the business community, with parents, with the teaching fraternity, with non-government agencies, with civil society. Because the student, when he leaves school, is not going to go home and remain confined to his or her family. He's going to be a member, an active member in society, an adult working member of society. and according to the natural order of things, chances are he or she will become a parent. So the school has a lot to do to prepare this individual for that time. But because there is no deliberate effort, no deliberate attempt by the powers that be to ensure that that which is taught in school is relevant for 21st century living, what is taught is still very much reminiscent of what was begun way back in immediate post-emancipation era, when, as you said, the education system was designed to produce students who were dependent, who were conformist, and who were non-thinkers.
Right.
So in terms of creating a student who is analytical, who understands the dialectic, who is critical in his thinking, instead of offering an education for independence, instead of offering an education that promotes entrepreneurship, the system is designed to produce persons who are dependent on others in a very large way and for a very long time on others for their sustenance, for their very existence. So that they are prepared to work, in the school system prepares them to work in an office or in a factory.
Right.
Or in a shop, maybe in a bank to some extent. That's a minority. But in terms of telling students, teaching students, giving them the wherewithal, exposing them via learning by discovery, learning by trial and error, learning by experimentation, and all of that, where students begin to understand, if I do this way, then I'm going to get that result, and that's not what I want, so I have to do it another way. And if I want to achieve this in life, this is what I have to do now that the foundation is being laid. And if I want persons to see me in a certain light, I have to govern myself and carry myself in a certain way. If I want to be respected, then I have to show respect. If I'm going to insist on discipline from others, I must first be disciplined myself. If I'm going to want to lead somebody to a particular point, I must know the way to that point myself, because one cannot lead where he does not go. If I want to teach somebody something, I must know the content of what I teach, because one cannot teach what he does not know. This kind of philosophy does not guide neither teachers nor the teaching profession. So you're right in that the process, the content, the intent, and the product of education does not, by and large, produce students who are able to stand on their own when they leave school.
Well, let me ask you this, Blake.
Those who do, it happens not because of the education system, but in spite of it. Chances are because of the kind of home and parents that they had behind them.
Right. Do you think that, this might be giving the politicians a little too much credit, but do you think for some reason that critical thinkers would be either a threat or maybe might be a way of forcing politicians to actually do work?
Well, I know that my knowledge of history, my studies and so on, tell me that dictators, tyrants and despots, they hate academics. They hate academicians. They hate thinkers, because they see those individuals as the greatest threat. Right. Because they have ideas. They have knowledge. So you can't fool them easily. They're not readily satisfied with that which you offer, because they are familiar with what truth is, and with what success is, and with what constitutes growth and development. And so they are not satisfied with what dictators would want them to absorb and imbibe, because dictators want people to follow simply and only their line of thinking, so that they become subservient, almost non-thinking followers. A true education system empowers its learners to think for themselves, to see not just what appears, but what is between and behind the lines, to understand not just the superficial perfunctory meaning, but to go beyond that, and to investigate and interrogate what is the essence of this argument, of this point. When I see this thing, what does it tell me now? But what does it also suggest for the future? Which is why it's important for people to understand history. Because the proper understanding of what happened before grounds you much more fundamentally in understanding what's happening now, and gives you the wherewithal to sensibly give a prognosis, that's the word I'm looking for, of what is to come. So people must be aware of all of that. The past, the present, and the future. And by the way, how is this going to happen by and large? Via reading. Well, students don't read and they're not encouraged to read. I put it to you and I put it to the parents and the ladies and gentlemen listening, that the only times 99%, maybe 99.9% of the time when students read, it is when they're reading a textbook, when they're given an assignment by the teacher. You go into the exercise on page 46. So in order to do it in past, you have to read what comes between pages 42 and 45. But in terms of reading for pleasure, reading for meaning, reading for knowledge, reading for learning, reading for the good that is inherent in reading, reading because of a love of books, reading because it opens up the mind, reading because it facilitates analytical and critical and logical thinking. Nobody does that. So that ask Law's bookstore, ask I forgot the name of the bookstore up at Chadwell and the bookstore in Greenland. Ask them when was the last time any student, because they put it to you, 99.9% of persons who do buy a book are adults. Ask them when was the last time a student came and bought a book.
Remember there's Kindle now, digital books. So
yeah, but do students read those? How many students, for example, when the computers that are given to students, the laptops that are given to students,
and the tablets
are taken from them for whatever reason, and they are investigated, what do you think is found? That the students were accessing 99% of the time.
Pornography.
Nonsense. Nastiness.
Yeah.
Rubbish.
And I know that.
So they don't read it. If they do read them, it has to do with an assignment that the teacher gave. So they go to Google information, or they go to ChatGPT, or they go to try to use some AI generated information. But in terms of reading for reading's sake, the way we read when I was in primary school, and we were in primary school, the way we read when we were in high school, the way people still read in other countries, that does not happen here. St. Kitts is the only island in the Caribbean, I say it all the time, that does not have a newspaper, a printed newspaper. Nevis has one, the Observer. St. Kitts used to have up to 5 at one point, up to 5 newspapers. I know because I used to write in almost every one of them. I used to write articles for newspapers all the time.
Well, the digital age
But
is here,
I am saying, is it only St. Kitts that has experienced the digital age?
Well, they're forcing themselves to want to.
Is it only St. Kitts that has experienced the digital age?
Obviously not.
Right. But why is it only St. Kitts doesn't have a physical newspaper?
I can't answer that one.
Oh.
But I got some more
And
questions.
there are countries that are more advanced digitally than St. Kitts, and they still have their physical newspapers.
Well, let me ask you this. Because following what you're saying and the challenge that you have put out to the listeners about even visiting a school.
Definitely.
And make their own observation. I personally have done that, not with no real intent, but was just passing by.
No, not just pass by. You have to deliberately. You have to set out to do it deliberately. To spend a day.
Yeah. But I still observed some weirdness.
Okay.
Even though I didn't go
and
deliberately.
just for a short time.
Yeah. And I was just seeing a whole lot of weirdness reacting to the bell as you were talking about that. You see students just strolling in on the premises, teachers just strolling out and in. It was just a weird experience. And yeah, so the question is, who is responsible solely for those teachers that are allowing this type of behavior to happen in the school?
But I'm going to tell you the truth, you know, it's going to end up on the desk of the minister, because the principal is the immediate supervisor, but she cannot take any action except he or she reports it to the Ministry of Education. And the Ministry of Education may, the Chief Education Officer, who is the head of the Education Department, may or may not refer that individual to the Public Service Commission, which of course, as we know, the members are all appointed by the party in power. So the minister is going to be informed, and as has happened before, and I'm sure it's happening now, the minister will simply say, no, don't touch him, or don't touch her, or okay, you can do as you like with her, because, and you know why. You know the why, because is going to be one reason. Because of political, suspected or known political affiliation. And that is the problem. I was in charge, let me tell you this, I was in charge of hiring teachers. I was in charge of, training teachers for a long time while I was in the ministry, including the induction course, where persons who wanted to enter the teaching service had to go through a couple of weeks of training, at the end of which, and then I subjected them to an interview and to an essay and all of that, and all of those activities were lumped together and given a grade. At the end of that, hey God, ladies and gentlemen, I would compile a list of 3 categories: strongly recommended, and not recommended to my superiors, with respect to the sometimes as many as 50, 80, 100 persons who attended the course. Do you know, every year I did it, persons who were strongly recommended were not hired, and persons who were not recommended, who were high up on the not recommended list,
They were hired?
they were hired. I can recall one particular instance when a girl, a female, who was almost at the top of the not recommended list, was in fact hired. And she ended up having to be transferred from school to school, because every school she went to, she was problematic. She knew nothing about the English language. She would write all kind of errors on the blackboard. I saw it for myself, because I visited schools on a regular basis. We had to call her out and tell her, please go in and correct that. Wrong spelling, wrong subject-verb agreement, wrong syntax, wrong all kind of things. Right? But then I learned later that she was providing some kind of favors to some people higher up than I was, and so on. I believe that still obtains. So, in terms of who is responsible, the buck stops at the Minister of Education. He's supposed to ensure that those below him are so equipped and given the freedom to run the Ministry of Education in such a way that it is decent and successful in every way. But he must first determine what constitutes success. That must be a priority. So, if, for example, right now, we have 10,000 students, and on a daily basis, 3,000 of them go to school late, one element of success might be to reduce that from 3,000 students going late to maybe just 300 in the first year.
Right.
And in the following year, to 30. And the next year, to 3. I don't believe we'll ever get to a point where nobody's always late. But at the moment, there's nothing like that. Right now, we have about 600 teachers. And we have a case where, on any given day, maybe 50 or 100 of them are downtown, when they should be at work. So success would be, within the first year or first 2 years, that those numbers are reduced to 10. And the second year, none at all. That they only leave, and by the way, a lot of them leave without informing the principal, without informing anybody. They just get up and leave. They jump in the car and they go, or they go down the road, they take a bus and they go, or they simply walk off the compound. So, these persons who I'm inviting to go to the schools to check them out, when you see a teacher downtown, politely approach him or her and diplomatically find out whether he or she has permission from his or her boss, which will be the principal. And if the principal is not there, the deputy principal, to be downtown. And if so, for how long? Because having served in that capacity myself as acting principal and deputy principal, when they come, may I have permission to go down to the bank or to go down to the post office? Okay, it's, you don't have a class coming up? Alright, but it's now 10:30. You said you want to go down to the post office, you're driving, I think you should be back here by 11. That is what should happen. But that does not happen. One, because some principals couldn't care less, they just let them go. And in other cases, the teachers don't even bother to ask the principal for permission, they just go. And why do they do that? Because they figure that the principal really can't touch them. I had teachers telling me that. Blake, you can't do me nothing because the minister this and the minister that. Blake, believe me bad, but you can't do me nothing because... I mean, I had to send home, I had reason to send home a couple of female teachers on a couple of occasions because they wore skirts that were shorter than time and tighter than a knot. And I said, no, this is not appropriate. Please go home and change it. Or blouses with all the cleavage in the world. At the time when I was there, male teachers were not allowed to have their hair plait. Of course, nowadays, everybody can plait his hair as he likes and so on, both teachers and students. But I had to tell the teacher, you are not going to remain on the school premises with your hair plait, and especially plait like that, so please leave. The Ministry of Education must determine what are its values, what are its principles. And I'm saying here that I don't think it was a good idea. I don't think it was relevant. I don't think it was necessary. And I definitely don't think it was sound idea for students to be allowed, male students to be allowed to go to school with their hair as they wish. Whether it be bald head, neat and nice and low cut, flowing like an afro or like free in the wind, or with their hair plait in all kinds of styles and fashion. I do not think that was a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing for teachers to go to school, male teachers to go to school with their hair plait either. I don't think it's a good, because we had already agreed, of course, for Rastafarian children to come to school and so on. So that was taken care of. I don't think it's a good thing for teachers, for students to be allowed to be bedecked with jewelry of all kinds. But you see them now in the classrooms with jewelry, and the school laws, the school rules forbid the wearing of jewelry. But they go through the gate and into the classrooms with their jewelry. You see them in school uniforms all the time with their jewelry. That's another thing I want the parents or whoever chooses to go to the school to look at. How many boys and girls, particularly girls, come to school with chains, rings, and earrings.
But Blake, you will be disappointed in that area because remember, those students doing that more than likely got those stuff from their parents. So if these parents visit the school or even speaking to them about these type of situation, I don't think that they're even against it, because when you look at it, even some of those teachers are parents themselves, and so there's not any real protest against this kind of weird development that is happening to our education system, because somehow it's like it's turning into like a fashion show other than trying to push out critical thinkers and mastery in skills so that we could have the nation being developed instead of importing help all the time. I don't think that's the priority. I don't think that's the goal.
But listen, God, you go to some other countries and you ask a child in grade 3, in grade 6 and 3rd form, what do you think of so-and-so? And that child will give you a fluent, sensible answer. Nothing saying kitchen.
I know that, definitely.
Nothing saying kitchen.
But for some reason we keep saying things like saying it's have a 90-something% literacy rate and this type of
that is propaganda.
Cosmetic type of...
That is propaganda, because we haven't even devised a means by which to measure literacy.
But it's actually out there on Google right now.
I know. But I'm saying to you, we haven't even devised a method by which to measure literacy. So how can we determine that?
So that is false information.
Of course it's false information. How many people in St. Kitts, including adults, cannot read or understand or fill out properly a form? So a lot of forms.
I know that is true. I mean, I see that quite often.
How many of them come to me to help me fill out passport forms?
Yeah.
For example, that's just one. How many of them cannot read signs? Far less read labels on the food stuff that they buy. So how do we determine literacy?
Yeah. But let me ask
So
you.
when the minister says he applauds success, see the success here? Verchise High School returned good results in 21 subjects. including grade ones in in PE, physical education. They got some good grades in physical education, so that's great. Charles E. Mills Secondary, they got 14 outstanding results in 14 subjects. That's what success is for them.
Yeah, but I'm seeing that in the parents themselves.
But not only that, let me tell you what is
Yeah.
false about this. Because even when you're talking about 20 students from one school got 10 grade ones, 20 students from that fifth form, that cohort, 20 students out of how many? That's one. It could barely be 20 out of 120 or 150.
Right.
Which of course is a low percentage. But not only that, how many of those persons in fifth form, look at the number of persons who started off with them in first form,
Right.
and compare to the number of them who ended up in fifth form. So it becomes not only 20 out of 120, but 20 maybe out of 200.
So then this can be success.
And we're boasting about that and calling that success. This is why I'm challenging the Ministry of Education to set out what it means by success. And in determining success, you must look at the cohort of students that entered the first form in a particular year. How many of them reached to fifth form? How many of them were able to write CXCs? How many of them were able to return the top grade? Because for me, the only decent grade in CXC is a grade 1. I used to mark CXC English myself, so I know. Because students can get a grade 3 and maybe even a grade 2 at times with less than 50%. And I wouldn't be surprised that in some subjects they get a grade 1 with less than 50%. When the subject is considered complex or difficult, like physics and chemistry and so on. So I have argued as well that CXC is doing an injustice to education in the Caribbean by assigning passing grades, so-called passing grades, grades 1, 2, and 3, to work which is decidedly mediocre and below par. And CXC needs to revisit its practice and policy. Too many students come here with grade 1s and grade 2s and grade 3s, which suggests that they pass the subject, but ask them a question, a basic simple question, and they're lost, and they just showed you a certificate, say they pass. Well, don't talk about in the languages, because students will show you that he has a grade 1 in French, and you ask him what's his name in French, and he can't answer.
We can have an
And
expert.
there's an oral aspect to the exam. Yes? So
Yeah.
don't tell me the student he could write sentences and write a story, but he can't talk it, because there's an oral aspect to the language. And I keep pointing out to people that the word for language in all the languages I know, French, Spanish, Dutch, and German, is the same word for tongue,
Right. So you must.
which
be able
suggests
to
that
speak.
it is to be spoken.
Yeah.
Language is to be learned with the view of speaking it,
Right.
not writing it. So if a child has grade 1 in French or Spanish and can't answer, how was your day? How is that? How is that grade 1? What does the grade 1 say? The grade 1 is saying something false. Yeah, you were asking a question, sorry.
Well, no, we're running out of time, but
Yeah.
I guess maybe I was asking if we're gonna have a next follow part to this.
I'm
because-
available to talk about education every day.
Because there's so much to cover, but I would just want to ask still. Now, it's quite obvious that the system of education and those who go at the top, the minister, the PSs and what's not, don't seem to be what you would call revolutionary people when it comes to education. So it's like they just go with what is there, try to, or like now we're seeing it turn into a fashion show.
Yeah.
We know the minister probably into this fashion show story, so I don't know if that's one of the reason.
I want the world to know, and I don't mind saying it. I offered my services as advisor in the Ministry of Education when the new government took office in 2022, and was soundly, well, did not even get a response
Right.
to my request, because I wanted to guide the new minister and the ministry along a certain path, which would see real success. But
But that's the question I was about to ask you. In the case of the minister, maybe being not able to deal with some of these things or to understand it, then what do you recommend he do? So as you say, you being deeply rooted in this education system, would have been good to be an advisor, at least because it seemed clear that they need some advising.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's only because of my experience, my qualifications in education, which are unquestionable, but because of my interest in and love for the discipline. Ladies and gentlemen, I have said my part, and I want to hope that you take up my challenge or my suggestion that you actually visit the school and determine for yourself whether you are satisfied with what you see and what you hear and what you observe. Thank you for listening, and look forward to being with you in 2 weeks' time when we either continue discussion on education or we have a different topic. I may or may not be here because the same person will not necessarily be here for every edition. Over to Igad for his final words.
Yeah, people, we give thanks again for being here. It's always a pleasure to be sharing these type of discussions with these people listening. But I'm really thinking that we should continue this conversation because there's more to be said. Like, for instance, what are the pros and cons of a curriculum-based system? Or, should we make sure that these competency-based education be given that same type of attention or that amount of attention that we give to the curriculum-based system and so on. So there's a whole lot more to discuss.
Right, and I want to use an upcoming session to make suggestions and recommendations for improvement. Right. Not just to point out the criticisms and point out the weaknesses as I would have done, but I want now to give concrete, sound advice as to what to do to remedy some, if not all. I won't have time to do it all, but at least some of the weaknesses, of the failings, the drawbacks in education. I want to make sure I complete my presentation on education, as it were, by doing that. So no one can say he's only criticizing me, not offering solutions. I will be offering solutions. Thank you.
So maybe the next one gonna be solution based with a starting point of maybe a small amount of critique, and we just go into that. So once again, people, we give thanks again for your ears, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time.
Good night.
Good night.